Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? Among the news items we have for you this week, the benefits of getting the annual influenza and a COVID-19 vaccine at the same time. FDA has issued warnings about suspect eye drops. The use of ozone as a therapy incorrectly. Argentina has announced that they're that much closer to genetically modified potatoes being available for average person's consumption. Mind-altering parasites from cats and rodents may cause frailty in elderly individuals. And the world is running out of data for AI, or at least experts are warning such. The timestamps for these and other news items can be found in the description box below. Let's start by triggering anti-vaxxers by telling them to get both their COVID-19 and influenza vaccine at the same time, because it's better. And this is not just a claim, there is actual data to support it, unlike most anti-vaxxer claims. While the study has not been peer-reviewed, so there is some degree of skepticism that must be applied to it, it is based on a reasonably well-defined process, at least as far as the COVID-19 vaccines go. What they've done is take two sets of healthcare workers in Boston and give them either the bivalent COVID-19 boosters and a seasonal influenza shot at the same time, or they gave the COVID-19 booster and the influenza vaccine on different days. This gives you a way to measure whether or not it's better to have one somewhat larger immunological response to the combined vaccine or the individual vaccines. Short answer, better to have it together, which does make some more sense, and it also involves being stabbed at one less time and feeling under the weather one less time. In terms of numbers, the benefits to getting the two together led to a 5.25 greater fold increase in antibodies for the Wu1 antigens, and 2.42 fold higher for the BA.5 spike, meaning both influenza and COVID-19 represented significantly better results in that respect. This was also true across multiple strains of COVID-19, which is arguably another benefit that this combined vaccine has over the pure single strain or dedicated COVID-19 vaccine, in that it provides a wider, more long-term, and arguably a better coverage purely to COVID-19, which for healthcare workers who are at greater risk is a huge thing. Next, in news that will continue to trigger anti-vaxxers and have us laughing all the way to the bank, the NHS, or the National Health Service in England, has found that they may well be able to eliminate cervical cancer by 2040, or at least they're promising to do so. But given this is a effectively quasi-government agency, what they're promising and what they'll deliver may not pan out. However, there is good reason why they are optimistic for it. First of all, the current rate of cancer for women is about 2,600, and particularly talking about cervical cancer here. That number continues to fall as the HPV vaccine has been rolled out. This means that the whole, or at least a major cause for cervical cancer, has been cut off at its roots, meaning it is unable to increase. However, we're still not quite there, at least in terms of what is effectively herd immunity. The World Health Organization says that we should be targeting 90% for vaccination of individuals for HPV. However, at least in England, it's only 86% of girls and 81% of boys, so we're between 4 and 9% off the intended goal. Of course, it'll be interesting to see just how it is that anti-vaxxers justify the decrease in cervical cancer rates, given that they've attributed every other result to things like hygiene. Shifting to, medicine that really doesn't work, the FDA has issued a warning to stop using eye drops as they've become rather suspect, and that's a concern. We're not talking one or two products here. In fact, there are over 26 over-the-counter eye drop products that have been effectively halted in sales because they could lead to infection. And to be quite blunt about it, eye infections are bad. It's not just that they're painful and difficult, it's that if they don't get treated reasonably quickly, they can result in eye damage, and this means partial vision loss, or in extreme cases, blindness. If that still progresses, for example, if you live in America, where healthcare will basically have you selling your kidney, you may end up with even further damage along the optical nerve, which can cause brain problems. Yeah, this is why over-the-counter eye drops have basically been halted by the FDA in some respects. Depending on the product in question, with regards to eye drops, we may be talking about just water that's become saline, that is 0.7% salt water. However, some eye drops are a little more complicated, but that is the most basic format, so it's not exactly hard to make, but you need to make it in the right kind of facilities. In this case, it's the inspection of a recent facility that was making eye drops that has led to the current scenario. The FDA found unsanitary conditions and a surprising and uncomfortable amount of positive bacterial tests. The conversation provides considerably more background and explanation as to what's going on, and why things have gone the way they have, so if you want to get more information, please do see the original article. Shifting to what you can almost call a case study, although it is archaeological in its nature, and it's all about a tumour. Now, tumours themselves aren't that unusual. In fact, arguably, what leads to tumours is essential for life, that is cell division. In this case, the issue is what the tumour was made of. Teeth. And no, this is not like the movie Teeth. Rather, this is more along the lines of really being eaten from the inside out, mostly by the cancer itself, but the contents of it were unusual and weird. The remains were originally considered to be fetal in nature. That owes to the location and nature of the discovery. But after looking into what's going on and the fact that it was not only disorganized but fully formed teeth, it was quite obvious that no, this was not a fetus. Most fetuses do not start with teeth. If they do, it would be incredibly painful. After all, having something gnawing on you from the inside out is somewhat nightmare-inducing. Although then again, a pregnancy may induce nightmares in some people anyway. Shifting from what is effectively ancient pathologies to a quasi-modern pathology, use of ozone therapy. We describe it as a pathology, mostly because of the individuals practicing it rather than the recipients or the actual treatment itself, although the treatment itself is a problem. In short, the idea is, fundamentally, that they inject ozone into the body. And theoretically, this injection of ozone is meant to resolve various issues, for example, fibromyalgia. The issue is, this is not science-based or evidence-based. In fact, it's basically human experimentation. The issue with, well, what they're doing is kind of fundamental. In fact, it's something that the body deals with every day. That is radical oxygen species, of which ozone is one. Ozone being an O3, or 3 oxygen molecules bound together. Because this is oxygen, it will readily break apart and the oxygen will jump onto another thing, which is why we rarely if ever get O2 in the atmosphere. Because of this and the consequential issues it generates, when you inject it into the body, whether it is the bloodstream or a local tissue, it will start to cause oxidative reactions, breaking down the tissues and causing damage. This will then lead to inflammation, and inflammation will lead to further damage because, well, the body's sitting there going, how the hell do we get rid of this stupid thing they've injected into us? The reason why some of the practitioners, and we're using that term very loosely, claim it works is that inflammatory process, as it can, in some instances, improve the rate of healing, but the evidence for this is incredibly limited, and honestly not very substantial yet, so it's not something you can rely on as proof of concept. The available data is even more limited than that. The reason why there is such a strong response to it is, as mentioned, it is a radical oxygen species. The way the body deals with radical oxygen species is to release antioxidants, but to be clear about it, antioxidants are not something the body is just going to suddenly ramp up production of for a single dose of ozone. Generally speaking, it's a relatively constant amount that's produced in the body, somewhat elevated by dietary intake, but even that is cleared out with relatively quick and easy processes, so you go back to the normal level for your body. To summarize what's happening, you're effectively injecting what is, at its simplest, a toxin into the body that has no known medical benefit. Shifting from charlatans, snake oil salesmen, and pseudoscientific bullshit to depressing news. US infant mortality has increased for the first time in 20 years. Although we've touched on this already this year, it's getting worse, to be quite honest, which is depressing. Well, depressing unless you hate children, in which case you may want to throw a party. At the moment, America is number 1, although it's number 1 by having the highest infant and maternal mortality rate of any country that is similarly wealthy. So if we're going to compare an apples-to-apples scenario, yeah, America is number 1, just all the wrong reasons. And this comes from data from the CDC. 2022 saw a significant increase, which honestly is not that surprising. Coming out from COVID-19 and all of the nonsense attached to that, there are good reasons to be, let's say, skeptical of those numbers initially. But those numbers kept growing, which is the problem here. It wasn't just a one-off peak. It was a year-to-year increase. A year-to-year increase that didn't happen for the 20 years prior. Between 2022 and 2002, America saw either a flat rate of infant and maternal mortality or a decrease. Yes, there were minor fluctuations from year to year, but it never got worse until now. Comparable countries like Germany, France, and England all saw decreases in their infant and maternal mortality rates at the same time. While it's not exactly clear how and why exactly this is the case, there are surprising racial biases to the data. Notably that American Indian and Alaskan Native women had the highest rate of mortality along with their infants, at between 7 and 9%. Interestingly, Asian and what are called non-Hispanic women, which, to be quite blunt from the sounds of it, appears to just be Caucasian women, had a rate of 3.5 per 1,000 live births. The overarching reasons for this are reasonably well understood and have been consistent for most year-on-year research. However, it doesn't explain the increase in its entirety. All it tells us is that the same reasons exist for infant mortality and for maternal death. On to news that will make you happy, or at least happy if you enjoy your carbohydrates in the form of potato. Argentina appears to have come that much closer to making its genetically modified potato available to the general public. The genetic modification is for a purely aesthetic change. It's intended to stop the enzyme that causes potatoes to brown once peeled and exposed to oxygen. The browning effect does have undesirable effects on the potato itself. It alters the flavor, texture, and rather obviously color, and this does have some consequential effects on the nutritional property of said potato. Of course, unless you're leaving your potato out to air for many, many hours, if not possibly a day, the effects may not be that noticeable. But from a aesthetic point of view, it is desirable to keep your potatoes in a nice appearance, whether that is the potato that you have sitting on your couch at home, or the potato that you're intending to cook. And we very much hope that those are two different potatoes. And next we have a kind of heartwarming story, although, to be clear about it, take what we're about to say with a lot of salt for a variety of reasons we'll explain. The short version of it is that the 14-year-old Haman Bakal is someone who's now been given an award from 3M for creating a soap that will, theoretically, help with dealing with cancer. The prize was from 3M, and it's basically intended to help the body stimulate the immune system so that it can then better fight cancer cells, and this is done by passing various drugs through the skin. It's similar in some respects to how a nicotine patch would work, it's just, well, a soap. First of all, we'll start with the, let's be blunt, we're going to laud him for doing this work. That is, he did a good thing, and he's been motivated to do so for good reasons, so nothing to detract from that effort. The next thing that follows are where we're going to start pointing out the fact that, although he began the work at home, the actual work itself was only made possible through working with university researchers at the University of Virginia and Georgetown University. His mentor and arguably a product engineer at 3M, along with the researchers involved, are arguably why this has become worthy of winning a prize, as a 14-year-old is, to be quite blunt about it, neither knowledgeable enough nor arguably capable enough of creating a product themselves. And more so when we start talking about what's actually in the soap. First, we have a medication that, yes, it is available to treat a range of conditions, like warts, fungal infections, and acne, and even certain cancers now. But it had to be delivered in a way that works, and this was done using lipid nanoparticles. This is one reason why we say that the work itself is only made possible by collaborating and arguably having actual academics help them as much as they have, in order to be able to not only design the nanoparticle, but be able to get the drug inside of it and get it to work the way it's intended to. You need somebody who actually knows what they're doing, which, to be blunt again, a 14-year-old won't. But the fact is, the work may not have been stimulated in the first place unless this kid was doing what they were doing. This is the key here. Yes, they may not be the sole driving factor, but they don't need to be. They began the series of dominoes that got everything going, and so the fact that they were awarded for their work is good, and what they have done is a good thing, and so they deserve all of the awards they've received for it. In other news that's medicine related, although this time we need to be a little more skeptical than we were with the cancer soap, there is a relationship between Toxoplasmosa gondii and frailty in elderly individuals. This is not that surprising. As we've mentioned in past videos, Toxoplasmosa gondii is present in up to 50% of the adult US population, and the majority of those individuals don't know they are carrying this parasitic organism. The key here is that, for the most part, it doesn't really do much. Yes, if you are, let's say, immunocompromised, you may die from it, so yes, some people will suffer extreme consequences. For the vast majority of other individuals, they're asymptomatic. The, let's call them even smaller subsample between dying from this and not seeing anything, have mild flu-like symptoms, and this leads to those individuals obviously being ill but not dead. Once you get elderly, that minor illness can become life-threatening under the right circumstances. While that may be a rather depressing way to introduce the topic, it does get worse for these researchers. Their work is relatively preliminary and based on a fairly small sample size for what they're trying to claim. First of all, it's 601 individuals from Spain and Portugal. All of them were over 65 years of age, and they had a variety of measures of frailty given to them. Think of things like weight loss, tiredness, and mental acuity. Further to that, most of the, let's say, effect or presence of gondii was done through blood tests, which aren't necessarily the best process for this, although at the same time they are less invasive than others. What they were measuring for was antibodies, which, depending on the state of infection at the given time, may or may not be a reliable way of figuring out what's going on. After all, unless the body is in the midst of trying to clear out the parasitic organism or force it back into hiding, there won't be any antibodies. If it is, then they'll be extremely elevated. If you catch it on the tail end or the very start of the process of responding to infection, you'll get a very small reading. So this is one problem with that particular approach. Overall, the findings are by no means definitive, but they are indicative of a, let's say, a cause and effect, which could prove useful. And next we have more industrial-related news regarding diamonds, but specifically artificial diamonds. Now, the conventional wisdom is that you spend 6 months' salary on a engagement ring for your would-be partner. Or, arguably another way of putting that is you spend 6 months' salary preparing for a divorce. An artificial diamond would be significantly cheaper, and they are somewhat useful. They're made through the same process as most other artificial gems, that is, high heat and pressure. Unlike, well, real diamonds, this means that they are significantly cheaper, as you don't need to mine for them. Modern production methods also serve to achieve the same result as far as natural and pressure and temperature methods go, but they're significantly cheaper and arguably quicker. It's a method called chemical vapor deposition, which is fundamentally passing vapor through an environment in which they can deposit a small amount of carbon, which adds up layer by layer to form the synthetic diamond. This has also added to the next advantageous approach to this. That is, because there is a cheap and relatively effective means of creating diamonds, they are going down in price, or at least as far as synthetic diamonds are concerned. This leads to their use in all kinds of things. Think of things like drill bits, used for both household or even industrial use, but also massive mining operations where they're drilling out tunnels. The diamond tips or diamond overlay on these allows them to cut through just about everything without damaging or destroying the incredibly expensive boring machinery. In fact, your synthetic diamond can do this because it's so much cheaper, at roughly 10% of the cost of a, let's call them a naturally occurring diamond, although it might be more appropriate to call it a mined diamond. This means that where a synthetically created diamond would cost, say, $500, your natural diamond costs $5,000, and the synthetic price does continue to fall. The Neurologica blog goes over this, and it does raise an interesting question about what it could be as an example of a post-scarcity world. Think kind of like Star Trek, although slightly less dystopian. Further to that, we have, in terms of dystopian futures, the world apparently is running out of data to feed AI, and this is a supposed warning from experts. Although, arguably, the world's not running out of data for AI. Rather, we're, first of all, not providing the data that is available across AI producers, but also, and this is probably for the better, we're not actually letting it access real-world data in real time. Nobody wants the AI models learning from what we're doing as we go along in our day-to-day lives. That would be a kind of scary thought. We've seen what happens with TAI and RINA when we're allowed to accessing humans in real time and being guided by us. The results are not pretty. The argument behind having more data available for this is that, the more data you train an AI on, and AI is not the right term, but you get better results with more data. The issue is, if you give it insufficient data, the quality results diminishes drastically. If you give it more data, you get exponentially better results, although it does require continuously greater data sets to do so. While this may sound all doom and gloom for AI proponents, there is a, rather blunt point to make, and that is, how much more can these AI models grow based on the not only current sort of data sets provided, but their nature of limitations at present. Right now, most of them are more like machine learning algorithms. You basically input a question and it outputs an answer of a kind. The accuracy of that answer will vary a lot. Because of this, you might find out that, it becomes more like anonymous, where you input a question about an iPhone and it tells you to recharge it in the microwave. Instead, it might become more likely that going forwards, rather than relying on these massive data sets, AI is going to be trained more against humans themselves and somewhat more directly, similar to what we see in Hollywood depictions. And this might be the common solution going forwards. Start with a large data set, and then start training it against people. The last piece of news we have for you this week is more like a fortuitous accident than anything that's necessarily newsworthy itself. That is, a relatively small tool bag that was dropped in space is actually the newest satellite visible from Earth. Yeah, this is one of those weird sort of news items. Astronauts on the ISS were conducting a spacewalk, and unfortunately, one of them dropped their space bag. The space bag is by itself nothing particularly exciting, it's just full of tools required for the various activities they were going to be up to. But it has its own satellite catalog number now, and it's been caught on video by various stargazers, and so you can find it yourself if you are so intending to do so. It's going to be located near 66 AQL and Almazan 3, although depending on how it continues to transit around Earth, its exact location may vary going forwards. Fortunately for the ISS and its crew, the new space bag satellite will not be a hazard, and NASA has looked at its trajectory and, after assessing it, found that it's unlikely to come back and hit the ISS or harm its occupants. The same cannot be said for other satellites in space, but, well, there's no astronauts on board those satellites, so the damage at least won't result in death. That's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.